This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam. And I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to believe and have such a material motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come above board to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader?
Don't remember his name.
You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 228. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we have a pretty great episode queued up here. A spiritual sequel to one we did a few years ago. I'm thinking of a Servant of the PSYWAR from, I think, March 2022. Our episode about...
So crazy that it's almost 2025.
Yes, the great war in Ukraine when villain Putler went rogue and invaded, and our Marvel hero Zelensky strapped on his Iron Man armor and went off to the killing field. So now here we are, like 2.5 years later.
I honestly forgot about all that stuff because I feel like now Zelensky is just hated by everyone in American politics. The adulation of Zelensky has totally disappeared, and now it's just. I mean, some people probably don't mind him, but
it is funny and interesting.
There's a lot who just hate him. Yeah.
Right. But before we go any further, today we're coming with backup. We're not just doing this as two little Westerners. We have somebody who I would say knows this conflict very well, and somebody whose Substack I discovered maybe only 2 weeks ago, but I was immediately addicted to. That is, of course, the Events in Ukraine Substack. And we have the author here today, Peter. Are you there, Peter?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm really excited to be on the show. Long-time listener.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that was cool I had no idea that you had listened to SJ before, so that was very exciting. We put this together rather quickly because events on the ground are kind of, after a kind of slog over maybe the last year and a half, it seems like maybe we're queuing up for a kind of denouement with Donald Trump coming back into the White House and kind of a broad sense of, I would say, creeping exhaustion in the West towards funding this war. But I've spent the last week, Peter, going through a lot of your posts from this year, which have so much good information and have a perspective I think that is very rare in English language coverage of this content. I think the first article that I found of yours, just trolling around Substack, was from November 25th, Monday Meth Come Down, which is subtitled Drugs, Clubs, Hitlerites, Unique Post-Soviet Drug Retailing Techniques, Albania, Kosovo, and Zelensky's Drug Habits.
Your algorithm would
I know,
send you
this is this is so made for me. Basically, this is so extremely my shit. And you just have I think you have lived in Ukraine, correct? I mean, you were of the Ukrainian, Russian background, etc. I mean,
some kind of bullshit, basically.
Post-Soviet, right? You were a post-Soviet.
I don't know. I mean, look, basically, my father is Russian, Ukrainian. Now he's Ukrainian. Now he's hardcore Ukrainian. I visited him first in Russia and then in Ukraine, 2014. I always forget about this. I actually participated in Euromaidan. This is crazy.
Really?
He dragged me along. Yeah. In Kharkiv, though. In Kharkiv, which is this eastern city. And so, because he was really into that shit, all of my family, they're all journalists, and so on, politically connected people in Ukraine. So yeah, I went to it in Kharkiv. This was, December 2013. It was really boring though, because it was only really big in Kiev. In other cities, it was tiny in the east, and and it was just like 10 people, like half of them, three of them were from my family or my extended family, and it was just about a couple other journalists in front of there's this place in Kharkiv where there's like a it's like the biggest square in Europe. That's how it's described. And it's a really big square. It's quite cool. It had some really cool Soviet architecture there. But more importantly, it had this huge Lenin statue, which was then taken, pulled down. But I saw it before it got taken down. It was really cool. It was really
Wow.
huge. But there was also a big statue of Taras Shevchenko, which is like the Ukrainian national poet, who was actually very much loved in the Soviet Union as this peasant, anti-landlord, whatever the fuck. But he's also the sort of symbol of Ukrainian, national whatever nationalism. And anyways, there was just a protest there, stood around, held up some posters to no one because no one cared. But then other members of my family, they were heroically going to Euromaidan, in Kiev and so on. But anyway, so I have that whole thing. And then I moved there in 2019 when I finished university in the decadent West, and decided to, I wanted to live in the real. And so I went to Ukraine, which has for me always been identified with the real. And but then it got too real. And in 2022, after the war started, I left. Sort of some weird shenanigans, got stuck in Kiev. Yeah, I've got a bunch. I think I've written about some of that crazy stuff that was in the first week of the war. We can talk about that as well.
For sure, yeah. So you were there when I
yeah.
mean, I was glued to my television watching it, 2 years ago. But you were there on the ground. What did that feel like while it was happening? I mean, did you think it was actually going to happen before it did?
Yeah. Look, so I mean, funnily enough, I started writing on my Substack basically 2 weeks or so before the war started, right? And I mean,
Right.
I'd been writing about Ukraine, or just about, yeah. I mean, well, I'd been writing before that on a Substack first then. And look, I mean, I went with some of my friends who I politically agree with. We went to a protest in support of the Minsk agreements a couple of weeks, 2 weeks before the war started,
Right.
which was a pretty because we were being photographed by some Secret Services guy the whole time, but which was a pretty maybe not the best decision to do. I mean, politically, I agree. We should have had the Minsk agreements.
Right.
There would have been peace. Some people wouldn't have liked it, but it was better than the other shit that was happening after. Now, even nationalist politicians are saying this in Ukraine. They're saying we should have, well, they're not saying that we should have signed Minsk, but they're saying that Minsk was better than what we're going to get now. And this is Poroshenko politicians are saying this. Anyway,
Interesting.
Minsk agreements, it was Ukraine gets Donetsk, Lugansk, Donbas region back to Ukraine, but they have minority rights basically.
Right.
Insane,
it seems almost like
horror.
a Republika Srpska type thing where
It is absolutely.
Right?
It's often compared to the Dayton Accords, and and people are always saying, "Oh, Dayton Accords are awful. Bosnia is dysfunctional." It's yeah, it is, but they did stop the war. You know what I mean?
They stopped
and
killing each other at the
they stopped
very
killing each
least.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, and obviously, yeah, it is dysfunctional, but you got two bad options, but there's one option which is clearly much worse. And the Dayton is absolutely the best comparison to it, and it's very, very very similar parallels in many ways. But anyway, so I mean, I wanted there to be Minsk. In the weeks coming up to the war, there was this big hysteria that the U.S. was trying to force Ukraine to implement Minsk, and this was this big thing that all of the big Ukrainian media, nationalist media, liberal nationalist media, they're all funded by the U.S. anyway. They were up in arms that no, we cannot, and because they always had this paranoia that Zelensky, who was elected on this peace platform and is this Russian-speaking blah blah blah, supported by the oligarchs that actually wanted Minsk to be implemented.
Yeah.
Kolomoisky, which we can talk about later. And they had this big paranoia, since when Zelensky was elected, Zelensky's going to implement Minsk. We're going to become, a Russian colony. It's so over. It's never been more over. And then in December 2021 and February 2022, there was endless like, and there was what was it? Blinken came to Ukraine. This was my first ever post actually about this. And then so the nationalists were all worried that the US would force Ukraine to implement Minsk in order to come to some kind of global agreement with Russia. Because, right, I mean, like this war came after Russia had these big demands to the US, which were like they were what? This was like August 2021 or something like that, or November 2021. I think
Right.
you guys know what I mean. There were
I think
Russia
Lavrov just
officially.
mentioned this in his Tucker interview,
Oh yeah,
which just dropped yesterday. I
yeah,
think he said, in the
yeah.
the fall and winter of 2022, we offered, very clear kind of demands.
2021,
Yeah.
2021.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
2021.
Yeah, I actually remember when those demands were released, and I was at my family's house in Kiev, and they're all like hardcore Ukrainian nationalist types, right? And they were laughing, like, oh, the Russians with their stupid demands, and they were saying, well, Russia's going to collapse soon anyway. We don't need to take these idiots seriously.
Oh.
People seriously believe this. Like, I find it incredible. I find it like, I've written a lot about this, but like, what Ukraine has taught me is, never underestimate the power of human self-delusion. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
people need to believe some bullshit. They want to believe some bullshit. They'll believe it all the way, And
Yeah.
Right.
anyway, people still say this, Russia's going to collapse, blah, blah. I mean, now it's like a little bit, anyway, they still do. Anyway, but so basically by late 2021, and Blinken said some vague shit that maybe might have been interpreted as. I mean, but the thing is, so basically at the time, I hope that yes, the US will force Zelensky to do this, and there'll be like howls of rage from the nationalists, but like it'll be great. So I wrote an article saying, and also like the media that I sort of trusted more, which is considered, Ukrainian media, which was banned and considered, evil Russian separatists, although they're not actually even pro-Russian. They want Ukraine to be neutral, and they criticize Russia as well. Anyways, as like Strana UA and Dmitry Chukirov and so on, and they were hoping as well that this would happen. But we were caught up in some hopium, basically. Like, we wanted this to happen and it sounded great. But then, I mean, by February 22, this was when Russia recognized the Lugansk Donetsk regions as part of, well, I mean, actually, it was first of all, no, as first of all, they recognized them as being independent republics, which they
Right.
hadn't
Right.
before. Before they'd always said that they are part of Ukraine or whatever, but we're going to help them in their demands or whatever the fuck. But then they recognized them as independent republics. They were recognized as part of Russia in like later on in the war,
Right.
basically.
Because there was like a plebiscite. There was like a vote later after
Yeah, that
the
was, I'm pretty
conflict.
sure that was like late 2022, as I recall. It was like after the Ukraine took back territories and anyway, whatever. But
Yeah.
but anyway, by 22nd of February, it was obvious there was going to be some kind of major conflict. But I mean, it seemed like I remember I was talking with this one guy, this Ukrainian journalist who I quite liked, who was more like he's like an economist. He actually died of unclear causes. He was quite a. I mean, well, I mean, like I honestly have no clue what happened there. I think it might have been suicide. I don't know, but he he was the editor of this Ukrainian journal that I wrote for sometimes, and it's like a left wing journal, but it became really shit. It got taken over by these like State Department leftoids, basically. But he was this cool economic
Like,
journalist
is that
and
a
so
metaphor? Or
on.
is that like true? And do you mean
No,
you mean
straight
the
up. I
U.S.
mean,
State
like
Department? Okay,
like
yeah, yeah, okay.
well, I mean, like I'm not even
Like
gonna talk about these people
NGO,
because
like
I like
USAID NGO backed type, like
look. I mean, like
professional
so this.
activist type people.
I feel bad, like sometimes I feel bad talking about these people. I used to know them. I used to like, get drinks with them and stuff in Ukraine. But like these are like the social movement people, like Taras
Yeah.
Belus. And these were yeah, like I knew them fairly well. I used to like get drinks with them so often, whatever. But like and they took I mean, they were in this whatever. That's a whole different thing. But anyway, but like one guy from the editor of this journal, he said he thought that there would just be a small scale war. Russia would take control of these provinces, Donetsk, Lugansk, right? And that was what many people assumed, there'd be a small scale war. So we were sort of expecting something like that. I was expecting something like that, a small scale war.
Right.
And I mean, the night before the war started, I like had I mean, I don't know. I worked out. I went to my garage, had a really nice last night at my garage, which I really miss. I really enjoyed my garage in Ukraine. You can get garages really cheaply in Ukraine. It's like $50 a month. And I had a really great sort of gym thing there. The garage scene is really interesting as well. But anyway, but anyway, but then yeah, the next morning, like the war started, and I was woken up. I think I woken up sort of by sounds of like weird bombs or something, but mainly like my dad called me and was like, "Peter, the war has started." I'm like, oh shit, like. But I never saw he had my dad had his own cool like bomb shelter. I never saw him actually. Yeah, and I think it was theoretically anyway, but like so then the war started, and yeah, and I mean we were in Kiev, like my partner and I for something like a week or so, but it was a really intense, fucked up time.
Yeah.
Just you just always what really we spent 2 nights in the metro, which was a stupid idea. There was no reason to. One of the best, like, look, this war stuff, you get really freaked out, like, oh, we got to go to the bomb shelter. Most of the bomb shelters are fake, like 90% of them. They're just like, either they're private, and even though they're on the government app, it's a bomb shelter, you go there and it's just locked at some guy's house. Or you go there and it's just like the first floor of some apartment building or like slightly beneath. And like we went to one of these things and then eventually the people just kicked us out. Basically, they were like, "Oh, well, there's gonna be like the mayor of Kiev released these ridiculous messages saying
Is
that
that
they're
Klitschko?
going to exterminate us." Yeah, yeah, Klitschko.
Hmm.
They're going to exterminate us as a nation. And so everyone thought there was going to be some kind of insane, like, I don't know, carpet bombing of Kiev.
Right.
And so we ended up like running away at 8 p.m., even though this was after the curfew, and we could have been shot and killed. Lots of this was happening at this time, where like people after curfew were getting shot and killed. Like a whole family got killed
I remember seeing
in the
that. I
first
remember
couple
seeing
days.
that video of
Yeah.
a whole car getting shut up. Yeah.
Yeah, because people just got given 20,000 guns. This was anyway, but like then we went to the stupid metro. The metro really sucked. We were there for like 2 nights and like locked in. Like they shut the doors. And these guys with AKs were walking around, and it's just like this whole vibe where everyone and you yourself included, everyone's just obsessed with like news and Telegram and shit, and you're all like scrolling Telegram, like what's happening, and we're all like, oh my God, the US has announced a new plane shipment, and like everyone's just obsessed with this bullshit like endorphin rush of the latest news, what's happening.
Hmm.
And so you just get like 2 3 hours of sleep every night. You're just scrolling shit. But I remember like the coolest. I need to write about this sometime. I was walking around before curfew, it's like the second day of the war, going to the shop, and this guy noticed me, and it was one of my old students because I was an English teacher. This kid, and he's like, "Oh, hey, how you going?" I'm like, "Oh, what's up?" And but then his family come over, and they're all from Donetsk. Like, so they came to Ukraine back in 2015 or whatever, 2014, when the war started back then.
Yeah.
And his father started talking with me, and his father was just like, "Why?" We were like talking in Russian. He was like, "This why?" He was like telling me some shit about War and Peace, like Tolstoy. Like I don't even know what he was. I haven't even read War and Peace. Like, but he was like telling me all this, these deep lessons. But what was interesting is he told me. I mean, he also was telling me some kind of like like in Israel they've learned to live with the threat of war. And but
Nice.
because I mean, so many people in Ukraine they like go back and forth. They lived in Israel for a while. They moved there, whatever the fuck, like.
Yeah.
And
True. Yeah.
Well,
I
after
met, I met this
9/11, that
really
was like a big thing. Americans would
yeah
constantly be saying like that in
yeah
Israel, this is what it's like. They've learned
Yeah.
to
yeah
live.
Now you
Yeah, they're
know.
constantly under
I
siege,
mean,
and that's just their lives. Yeah.
but he had this kind of interesting. I don't really think he meant it like he
Right.
his lesson that he told me, which I think is kind of true, is that like don't worry about going to the bomb shelters because they're not really going to help you anyway. You just need to stay in your apartment and relax because if you're gonna die, you're gonna die. Like there's no need to like
Mm.
worry about it
Hmm.
that much. And I think that is true. Like, I mean, there's some kind of thing that there's like a two-wall rule. If you're behind two walls in the apartment, that's like a better idea. I don't know. I mean, look, I'm not going to give people safety advice. Anyway, sorry, this is a bit of it was just an interest. That's kind of the vibe. There was, all kinds of weird stuff that happened. This Romanian cokehead businessman that I met, like, yeah, we can talk about that if you want. There are all kinds of weird stuff that happened in those couple of days. But we ended up escaping. We like waited at the train station all day with like a million people. Everyone was like
Wow.
fighting to get on the train, and then we got on this train. I like slept on the floor, and it was like some straight up, Indian train situation
Hmm.
style thing where everyone's like walking over each other, and I was on the floor. And but it was chill. We got out,
So, did you go to
and
Poland?
Well, I mean, first of all, we were in like West Ukraine for a bit.
Oh, right. You were able to, yeah, just get
Um,
out of the east. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, out of Kiev, yeah. Because I
Or
mean, at this
the
point,
cent.
Kiev was
Yeah.
basically at this point, Kiev was surrounded by the Russian army, and like
Hmm.
so, it seemed like there was a legit sort of risk of it becoming some kind of Mariupol situation where there's
Right.
just going to be this intense, bombardment
Street
and
fighting.
urban warfare, and
Yeah.
this is like I was telling this Romanian businessman guy that I met. We were like having a smoke on the balcony. I was like, "Look, man, we're gonna become like Raqqa right now. You know what I mean? Like, or Mosul or whatever the fuck, and we're gonna be put on the media as these like, oh my God, Westerners killed by Russia, and that's gonna be our purpose to be like
Yeah.
these really." And my father didn't want me to leave the city. It was really weird, and I honestly feel like he wanted me to be some kind of, I don't know, some kind of martyr or something. I don't
Martyr.
even know,
Oh my
but he didn't
god.
want me to leave the city. And eventually I was like, no, fuck this. This is like we gotta leave, and so we did, and went to West Ukraine. Saw all kinds of, it's classic West Ukraine, boring, poor, and quiet. I mean, it's pretty, it's nice. I remember like there was this crazy like we got first day. There was like I have it on my Instagram actually. I can send you a photo of this. There was this poster put up. It's like a famous Barbarossa like Nazi poster
Nazi invasion
of
poster.
like the Eastern barbarians like and the Nazi knights. And they took this poster and they just added Ukrainian words to it, and it was like we're gonna fight the blah blah. And I took a photo of it. It was just like it was because it's a really famous poster. You can find them on Google and shit. Anyway, we were there for a while, like I don't know, 5 days or so, and then we went to Romania because it was
Hmm.
closer, and the Polish border was so super packed, really hard to get
Mm.
through. Like you have to wait for days and stuff. And I mean, so I'm not a Ukrainian citizen, so I was able to leave. But I'll be
Right.
real. There are people in my family who are Ukrainian citizens that left before me and illegally because they're men, right?
I
And
remember
but they
you
have
said
their
that in
like,
one article. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That
yeah,
they had already
yeah.
pieced out by the time the war started, right?
Yeah, yeah, they were like the favored. They were, yeah, they're more beloved in my family than I was.
And
And
are they super Slava Ukraini from a
of
distance?
course they're
No, of course,
hardcore, like
yeah.
a poet. Man, this is the guy that was actually at Maidan in 2014. This
Mm.
romantic poet, blah blah. Total grifter, more of a grifter than I am. I mean, I've got a real job. I'm not just doing stuff that, I've got a real job. But
Hmm.
this guy, and then he just hung out in Bulgaria for a while at a fucking resort for a couple months. And this is all the time where, like, tens, hundreds of thousands of, I mean, at this time, there wasn't so much forced mobilization. This was the beginning of 2022. But, like, anyway, incredibly hypocritical and really blackpilling about everything, really, because it's like, otherwise, people get shot at the border. People try and leave the country. They get shot and killed by border guards in
Or
Ukraine,
there's that
if you're a
river
man.
on the Polish border
Uh,
where what, like 30 men have drowned in the last
Yeah, yeah, I think
since
yeah, it's been like
2022?
40. Yeah, 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 and that's just by official counts, the
Oh,
amount of
right,
number of
right,
people who've drowned. And every other month or so, there's a new. I mean, these are official reports, and you got to wonder how many this happens unofficially of
right.
like a man getting killed by the border police trying to cross. And this is by Ukrainian border police. So the Ukrainian border police shooting and killing Ukrainian men who are trying to leave the country, right?
What is this? The
Uh,
Berlin Wall? I mean,
I know.
it's kind of ironic that, this is all about like rebelling against erasing communism, breaking away from all that
Yeah,
stuff, and then they end up doing a heckin'
yeah.
authoritarianism. I mean,
Well, people
that's just
say
the
this
tip of
in
the
Ukraine.
iceberg. Uh-huh.
People even like because the people are like, we are resurrecting the West Soviet totalitarian practices, but without like anything of the good stuff, I guess. But people saying this, I mean,
Yeah.
like nationalist Ukrainian journalists who are like, because everyone's kind of critical of, not everyone, but like lots of people are critical of Zelensky for the
Right.
past already year or so, and so they often criticize the government and the situation fairly. I mean, obviously they're still very nationalist and blah blah blah, but they often, yeah, say like, look, this is worse than the Soviet Union, or this is the same shit as the Soviet Union, blah blah blah. Anyway, but then basically, eventually, we went through to Romania, waited at this, bloody what's it, refugee crossing for a couple of hours. There was actually a funny thing where I took a selfie with my girlfriend, and it ended up including this person. I didn't know who this person was. My girlfriend did. Some kind of celebrity, like Ukrainian trans, like YouTube vlogger. and she
Mhm.
tried to cross with us, but she wasn't let through because like on the passport
Oh, is
shows
this the
man.
person who like went there to like?
Oh.
Was she from the United States or was she
Oh,
No,
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 Ukrainian?
you're
she's
thinking of the
Ukrainian.
different
She's
trans
Ukrainian.
Yeah.
influencer, who
No, no,
went
no,
over
no, no,
there
no, no.
to
That's
yeah,
not
no.
Ashton, whatever the fuck.
Okay.
Right,
Okay.
right, right.
She would have no trouble going
Right.
forward.
Okay.
This
I
is a
see.
Right.
Ukrainian
Okay. Yeah.
citizen.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Apolitical, like just like
Yeah.
there's like in Russia and Ukraine, it's like women are really into watching these like gay trans vloggers. I got nothing against it, totally fine. I just find it kind of a curious phenomenon. I don't really anyway, whatever. Right now they've all gone to Bali and they have all these crazy like reality TV shows and stuff
Oh,
about that.
wow.
But anyway, like she was behind us in the line and then she wasn't let through. And this was the thing she posted about on Instagram that day. But then she went through again and gave them a bribe or something and got through. Like she posted how she was in Europe. But anyway, it was just a funny
Mm.
little thing that happened. But yeah, and we then were in Romania for a bit, a couple months living there, and then we left there as well. Romania is an interesting place as well. Lots of similarities, but that's a whole other topic. But yeah, that was sort of the vibe. I mean, it was definitely it's like extremely intense. It's just that
Mm.
people are just really, really, I mean, obviously incredibly on edge. And you have this like media thing that's just constantly amping people up, constantly, showing some photos of like, some people that were killed, which is, fair enough, but it's like I guess it's just framed in this way of like really hardcore, like racial, like all Russians must be killed. We got to kill
Yeah.
all Russians. Russian
Yeah.
nation is shit. It's subhuman. The orcs, and
Yeah,
then
the
just getting
Right.
orcs,
people
we have to
so
keep
amped up.
fighting them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We're orcs, and like it's one thing because I've been kind of because there are these like State Department leftoids that try and compare Ukraine and Palestine, whatever. And it's like, I don't know, I like look and it's like obviously there's another thing where the scale of destruction is totally different. There's no way to really compare Ukraine and Palestine in terms of like, the actual destruction inflicted on Palestinians is like dwarfs Ukraine. But, anyway, but apart from
Mhm.
that, if you look at like, I don't know, Palestinian media and propaganda or whatever, like I mean, there's not the same emphasis on like we must destroy the Jews. Totally,
Right.
absolutely. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's
Yeah.
obsession.
That's a
It's
good
like
point,
some
actually,
people
for
are
how
into
much
that,
shit they
and
get
that's
for that compared to the
yeah,
Ukrainians, the way they are
yeah,
like, Black Sun, like, we must kill these Russian dogs. Like, it's extreme,
Because the
right? Like,
United States,
yeah,
like, and the like international media in general, like, is super on them about like anything. Like, if they
yeah,
step out of line once in terms of like, oh, is this really about Jews? Like, they'll jump
yeah,
down like their throats. Whereas
yeah,
like Ukrainians can get away with anything with the U.S.
yeah,
media. You can just
yeah,
like the Canadian Parliament like had that guy who was like in the SS like come over.
Galician
Yeah,
division, yeah, and like
yeah,
gave him a
yeah.
standing ovation. And I remember PBS Frontline like interviewed some Pravi sector guy and like blurred out the Bandera portrait like in the background behind his head. Like, or they released it first, and then somebody realized like, oh shit, and then they went and like blurred it, which is like, fuck you, like show the Bandera portrait. Let this guy show you who he is. But no, they can just totally get away with it, and it all gets like. I think that's something that comes through with which fascinated me about a lot of your articles was talking about this weird like symbiosis between I guess what you call at various times like the Sorosite or sometimes like the liberal Hitlerite kind of like NGO Western Atlanticist kind of people, and then the sort of like Azov Chud like straight neo-Nazi like thug thing, and how sometimes these
mm,
groups, the Western media has made a lot of effort in kind of like really separating these two groups in terms of like ignoring and downplaying the Azov thing of like that's not very important, and then even kind of whitewashing though the kind of
mm,
like ambient Hitlerism of these like Sorosite people. And
mm,
what they really do is just code them as like liberal, like I think
mm,
what you called EU Berghain values. Like
yeah,
they're the personification of like this
yeah,
wonderful, like no borders, like love, and
yeah,
blah blah blah, and how that's what gets packaged and sold to the West.
yeah.
But then your observations on the ground, these things are much more like entangled and in a way kind of like need each other, right? I mean, they're not
Oh yeah,
exactly the same, but like one could not exist without the other in terms of this whole
yeah,
project, right?
yeah. This is a really interesting whole topic because I mean, I think one of the reasons I'm interested, like, I mean, it's also just an important thing happening in Ukraine, these different groups and so on. But also, I mean, the way that often when people talk about Euromaidan, for instance, right, 2014, they say, oh, that it's kind of it's either it was liberal or it was right wing. You know what I mean? And it's this is the argument. Like, was it a liberal revolution for civic? Was it a civic nationalist revolution, a liberal revolution, or was it a far right ethno nationalist revolution? And I mean, Volodymyr Ishchenko, this Ukrainian Marxist sociologist, has written about the sort of kind of deconstructing this idea of civic nationalism in Ukraine. It's not really so correct to speak of it as this civic as opposed to ethno-nationalism. Because the thing is, like, liberal discourse in Ukraine, and this is true in Russia as well. This is like a thing that kind of comes especially from the late Soviet period. Like my family, they're like really into this sort of thing. They grew up in that period, where it's like liberalism really began as this anti-communist thing, right? In this area. And it also began as a very like, I mean, I'll give an example, for instance. My father is a big liberal. He loves Pinochet, for instance. And this is really common
Pure
among
I mean, he was a neoliberal. You
yeah,
wouldn't think about him as a like the way we use it
yeah.
now, but like he literally was a neoliberal, right? Pinochet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. But what they like about him is because he was anti-Soviet and he stopped the Soviet communist revolution or whatever the fuck, you know. And because in the Soviet press they always talked about, you know, Allende and fuck Pinochet. So as a result, they were like, oh well, you know, Pinochet is cool. Also, just because neoliberal reforms, that's great, economic liberalism, and then also they had lots of the demands of the the liberal opposition in the Soviet Union in the 80s were like, we got to stop funding these like national liberation movements in the global south. They're stupid, we don't need them, and we need to work with the West and so on. And liberalism in the Russian Ukrainian context was always like incredibly, it was not like liberal values, whatever they mean, were much less important than this like really hardcore Eurocentrism, like Europhilia. And this isn't, I mean, this has always kind of been true in the it's like this is a true across the third world where it's like liberals, they don't really believe in that much apart from just they just really love the West. They just think the West is just paradise on earth, and if we do what the West tells us, we're also going to live like in Berlin, whatever. This is their, and they generally work for some kind of Western companies, some kind of programmers, or they work for some NGOs, whatever, and their income is tied with the West. And then just in general, even if they don't work for the West, they have this kind of internal colonialism thing going on where they see the majority of the citizens of their country as being subhuman, essentially. And this is very true in Ukraine, where it's like in Ukraine, the concept of like Russian as opposed to Ukrainian has very little like ethnic meaning. So like, for instance, my family, they're all like Russian speaking. Half of them like were born in Russia or like most of their life lived in Russia. Now they're in Ukraine, or now they're like Ukrainian nationalists or whatever. But they hate like Russianness and like Russian and in Ukraine, it more refers to like working class people who live and this like who especially in the southeast of Ukraine. This was where the industrial heartland of Ukraine and the Soviet Union was based.
Right.
Ukraine had Soviet Union's most advanced industry.
Yeah, the ICBMs, everything like
ICBMs. That's right. That's how oppressed they were by the Soviet Union, that they had the most advanced technology. But in the post-Soviet period, these groups of the population have so much hatred from the liberal urban, in Kiev and stuff in the capital, because these groups would keep on voting for the wrong people. They would vote for like social democrats. They were like pretty incompetent as well, but they weren't voting for the real liberal, hardcore liberal, privatize everything candidates. They were voting for people like Yanukovych. Well, they were voting for Yanukovych, who, and Kuchma as well to an extent, but like that wanted to preserve the industry, right? And not to do like shock economic like liberalization, still like do privatization and still but not in a shocked way, right?
Yeah.
And they represented like Ukrainian big business as well. They wanted to have some kind of autonomy from transnational capital and so on, and wanted to have their own thing going and had their own sort of international and were actually competing. There's also a whole interesting subplot of in the 2000s and 90s, the U.S. competing with Ukrainian military industrial manufacturers, exporters, and also really worrying about them selling their weapons to China, but also China taking control of Ukrainian advanced military technology, rocket technology. It was also a really important case in which a Ukrainian Soviet warship was bought by China. This was 2005, 2006. And with the aim, because they weren't allowed to sell it for military purposes, but Ukraine was so broke, they just sold it. It might have been even in the 90s or something. But they sold it for China to build a floating casino on top. And
Wow.
surprise, surprise, it was turned into like China's first, like, in this new class of warships. And it was like, important for China's military development. And this really freaked out, US analysts. And there's this article I've been working on for like forever. I need to just finish up doing it. But basically, like, the US really did not like the existence of Ukraine's military industrial complex. And Ukrainian journalists, and then after 2014 happened, Maidan happened, what they did was they put these Sorosites, like Mustafa Nayem, who's really, really important figure he was the guy that started Euromaidan. He was this Afghan Ukrainian journalist whose actually parents were in the Afghan government before the revolution, and then who actually moved to, anyway, really weird story. Anyway, but he was a really well-known at Ukraine's biggest like liberal USAID-funded newspaper, and he was really important in Maidan. But then, like, with zero experience, he was given like important roles in Ukraine's military industrial companies after Maidan, along with other like Lithuanian guys and all this kind of stuff, foreign Western people and so on. And they really drove those industries into the dirt. They like really ruined Ukraine's military industry, ironically, because they're preparing for this big war, but they really ruined Ukraine's military industry. And Ukraine has like very, very little military industrial capacity, even though it used to be like the heart of Soviet military industrial capacity. And throughout the 2000s, Russia was dependent on Ukrainian military industrial inputs for the most advanced, the engines, the helicopter engines, all these technologically advanced parts. Russia needed them from Ukraine. And this was a really big aspect of Russia and Ukrainian relations. And Russia was the only one that was buying Ukraine's most technologically advanced production. No one else was interested in it. The West wasn't interested. And these were the most advanced sectors of the Ukrainian economy. But then after Maidan, Ukraine lost all this. And it really became, economically, it was incredibly damaging. But then basically what happened was, and one interesting description of this is provided by this Ukrainian journalist, Alexei Kush, and he describes how the Western strategy was one of slow euthanasia, because they didn't want. Sorry, I'm just going on a tangent, but this is actually really important.
This is fascinating.
Because basically they were worried that if they closed down these military industrial factories immediately, the problem is then that all of these technicians, they just go to China, right? Because China has this big program of scouting, like the US does.
The US
as well.
did in the 90s,
yeah. Of scouting for like, especially post-Soviet, military, engineers and so on. And they'll go to China, and that's bad for the US. And so the solution instead is to just take control of these factories, to slowly run them into the ground, so that and then all of the personnel dies alongside them in the factory in Ukraine. And that's what's happened, with Motor Sich, this really important engine factory, helicopter factory. Lots of helicopters you'll see in like third world conflicts, they're actually Ukrainian manufactured from Motor Sich and stuff. I'm pretty sure I was watching a Ansarallah Houthi video, movie recently, and I'm pretty sure they had a Ukrainian helicopter as well, because they're cheap, they're pretty good, and it's tough because this was it was cool. Like Ukraine was producing, good, they were cheap helicopters. But then after Maidan, what happened was they had their own helicopter industry, but instead the government was purchasing helicopters from France, from Airbus, which are much more expensive. It's like, why would you not support your own domestic industry? And people were criticizing this, but still, that wasn't the point. The point is to like buy Western and so on. And this actually leads on to another really important role of the Sorosites, right? This was one of the first articles that I wrote way back when. I'm pretty sure this was before the war as well. I'm pretty sure. It's called that Bill 3739. If you just look up Bill 3739, you'll find it, and it's like all free and stuff. And basically, it was this piece of legislation that was proposed by the Minister of Industry under Zelensky in 2020, which would have like implemented some industrial localization, so that like state purchases need to include some Ukrainian components, which is a totally normal practice in like, especially in the US. Any country has this, right? But Ukraine doesn't have this, and which is crazy. And the Minister of Industry, he brought up these crazy numbers, which is that in the US, like only 2% of their state purchases are from foreign foreign companies, and the same in the EU, it's like 5% or whatever. But in Ukraine, it's 40%. And like it's this huge figure where we're not supporting, we're just buying, and also they were also buying from Russia, from China, from Belarus, and so on, but also lots of from the West and so on. But this is just obviously awful for you. And he had all these numbers about the collapse of Ukrainian industry. I can even get up there. Well, whatever. He had lots of good numbers about the collapse of Ukrainian high-tech industry in the past, in the post-Maidan period, basically. So they proposed this bill, but then basically the Sorosites, they just totally shut it down. And they said that, oh, this violates Ukraine's commitments, because Ukraine signed very stupidly this agreement on basically limiting protection, localization with the GATT, like with the WTO basically, which is a stupid idea because the only other like signatories to that are the EU and the US basically, and to this particular agreement, and it just locked in like they're allowed to have their own things basically, but Ukraine can't do its own things. But anyway, but all of these big NGOs, these anti-corruption NGOs, they just went crazy. Like, no, we can't do this bill. Localization is awful. Protectionism is awful. It's all corruption. If we have corruption, we're going to be like Russia. We cannot do this at all. And they ended up just like ruining the bill. And the bill was eventually passed with all these amendments so that it only affected production from Russia and Ukraine and Belarus, where it's like we cannot buy stuff from Russia and Belarus, right? And I think and China. So it was just ended up being like we're going to favor Western products production even more, right? One other random interesting thing is Eric Prince, Blackwater guy. He was actually interested in purchasing this really important factory that I was mentioning, Motor Sich, this helicopter factory. He came to Ukraine in 2019. Bolton, because the Chinese were trying to buy this factory in 2019, 2020. And Bolton actually came out with a statement, was like, we cannot let China take this factory. And then it ended up being that the Ukrainian secret services, they ended up nationalizing, like taking control, like the Chinese had already bought the factory, but they just took it away from them. And the Chinese, like they paid like $3 billion for it. And they were going to actually make it run, make it do stuff. It would have been good for the factory, right? But they're like, no, it's got to just die, right? And anyway, that's a whole big saga. So anyway, so I mean, that's just a really great example of how these like, neutral, wonderful anti-corruption NGOs, in reality, they function to maintain Western economic colonialism. That's their whole purpose.
Right. Yeah, this is
anti-corruption discourse.
Golos, this party, right, which was like the biggest opponent of the bill.
Well, they were really big against it. That's right. Yeah. I mean, the EU even wrote a special letter, like, please don't do this bill. It's really bad. And like, and it's just very ironic because now they're all complaining, like, why does Ukraine have no military industrial capacity? Like, why
Yeah,
are
they
they
have to go
asking the
begging
West for all this stuff?
famously. This whole war, the
Yeah.
exact dynamic of it has been Zelensky going to Western and NATO countries and asking for weapons purchase, money to
That's
buy
right.
weapons from
Yeah.
them. And, with the exception, I guess you've talked a little bit about the sort of like homespun Ukrainian drone industry, which has sort of cropped up. But that almost seems more like out of like battlefield tactical necessity and like lack of other
It's very
resources.
like low tech.
They like
Yeah,
bootstrapped
it's very low tech.
these things.
I mean, they're mainly just like ordering components from Alibaba and shit like that. And they're always discussing how to
Temu drones,
they're always
yeah.
worried that China's like going to try and cut off supply of their drones, and they're all like, no,
Oh
China's
my
gonna.
god!
I mean, and there's some
that's
kind of
why they need Palmer Luckey, but we could talk about that in a bit.
Palmer Luckey, that's
Ukraine as military laboratory for like the new military industrial complex of the future is another interesting angle that you've
I mean, like
that you've touched on.
There's this. I just found this statistic. It was like from 2013, 2019, domestic exports of aerospace production declined by 5 times, train wagons by 7.5 times, metallurgical products by 1.7 times, chemical products by 2.1 times. So it's just like every
Just slowly
big
bleeding
industrial
every
sector.
sector and making them completely.
That's not even slowly bleeding. It's just a
pretty
collapse.
fast. Yeah.
It's like by 7 times, 700% decline, right? Like
It's a bust out, basically.
like lots of sectors just don't exist anymore. Like Western Ukraine, Lviv, it used to have the Soviet Union's like biggest bus factory. It was in Lviv, and it was a very technologically advanced area. But that just doesn't exist anymore. It's totally does this, so. And there was a huge car factory in it's pretty sure in Zaporizhia, it's an eastern
Oh yeah.
city, very large car factory, and that just doesn't produce cars anymore. Like not a lot. It's one of the biggest car factories in like the Soviet Union and so on. But anyway, so it's
Yeah.
yeah,
It's really sad
yeah,
because it is like in some ways it's like a repeat of what happened to all the Eastern Bloc states in the 90s,
mm,
whether it's the
mm,
DDR or Poland, where
mm,
and I think a lot of the people on the ground like didn't
mm,
that's at least my understanding is a lot of people like didn't understand when they were embracing kind of like
mm,
liberalization that meant the
mm.
industrial base would be bought out by like Western corporations and immediately scrapped, and like everyone would
Yeah,
be thrown into unemployment. They're like, wait, what the fuck? Like,
mm,
I thought
mm,
you just meant we would have like it'd be more like
yeah,
social democratic or something. And yeah, there's another interview you would like link to of a guy who was a
mm,
kind of anti-Soviet dissident in Ukraine, but now is kind of very critical of like
mm,
what Ukraine has turned
mm,
into, and is kind of
mm,
lamenting of like none of the things we were like protesting about in the 80s.
mm,
Actually, like unlike motherfuckers like Slavoj Žižek, he at least this guy
mm,
could like admit that he was a fucking lib in the 80s, and then
mm,
like the beautiful social democracy thing, like the red rose did not bloom the way like he
mm,
expected it to. Instead, all the whatever worst aspects of like the old system were there got kind of like preserved and amplified or came back,
mm,
and then none
yeah,
of the good, so like you said, none of the good social things were there
mm,
this time, and instead
yeah,
so it's just like it sucks. And then you can see, I mean, even that's where it gets really sinister is like when you factor in the things like the Nord Stream 2
mm,
sabotage, which like the
mm,
United States absolutely had to be like involved in at this point. They're slow walking out like, oh, maybe the Ukrainians did it. But like Germany's silence around that and not like, like I was there in 2023 and I asked a few people about Nord Stream 2, and it kind of was like, oh yeah, that like it just was not in the discourse at all. Like this is actually like hurts our economy, and our greatest ally just did it, but we're like fanatically committed to supporting this war against Russia, who like is kind of integral. Like, and all the end result of all of that is that the United States gets a huge leg up in like selling natural gas to the EU, and now the EU is more dependent on the United States for its energy and is like kind of economically spiraling now, like as a result of that. So even the EU is going to end up almost not as badly as Ukraine, but like in a kind of like, I don't know, macrocosm kind of way, like on a bigger scale, but in a less intense way, they are weakening
mm,
themselves and becoming more beholden to the US and
mm,
becoming like puppets of, like US dominance at a time when it feels like that's not exactly like the wisest play for the
mm,
EU to like put all their eggs in that
mm,
basket, because
mm,
China and, the BRICS
mm,
countries are kind of rising up. So it feels like
mm,
there's been this dirty strategic long game by the kind of Atlanticists, by the I think you appropriately do call them Sorosites. We're not afraid to say it on this podcast, as you know.
right.
And
Well, it's like
these NATO
Soros.
people.
Soros exists. It's like I don't know. My
He
my
does
my parents
exist.
work with that guy. They met with him every week. I mean, like I feel. I mean, Sorosites. I feel like this describes people in Ukraine. They're concretely. They work for NGOs that are sponsored by the International Renaissance Foundation, Soros thing,
Right.
whatever. Like I don't think Soros is responsible for like all of the world's ills, but it's like if you're getting your money mainly from this guy, well then like sure, I can call you a Sorosite. You know what I mean? Like and you have the same ideological beliefs as other people who work at the same organizations. But I think
Yeah.
Atlanticist is a better term for the people in the US because they're not getting paid by Soros. They have their own thing going on. I mean like they have the same similar perspective.
Yeah, you
Like he's
make
But
this
part of the
point.
coalition, but not like
yeah,
I think you're familiar
yeah,
with Aaron Moulton's work. I think you listened to the episode
yeah.
we done. You've read The Influencing Machine, and I
Great
highly
book.
encourage anybody to like find that book and read it and listen to him, because I think the way he framed like the activities in Eastern Europe, which are often
Mm,
totally obscured because like the right wing doesn't like to talk
mm,
about it because they're obsessed with like trans bathrooms and blah, 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 and the
yeah.
BLM, and all that shit. And then liberals like out of this kind of like reflect like best case scenario, out of kind of
Mm,
misplaced, we don't want to give any air to these anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists kind of thing, like refuse to talk about his influence at all. But when you look at him
yeah.
in Eastern Europe from really the 80s up through right now in Ukraine on the ground. As
Mm,
you go over again and again in all these articles, there are like
mm,
dozens, I think, of NGOs that are directly
mm.
funded by him. Like this is a huge focus of his
100%, yeah.
foundation's work, right? And like, and
Mm,
this is kind of a defining. It really is kind of the primary defining thing of his entire career as like a social
mm,
impact activist, right?
mm.
Combating Eastern closed society, what he sees as this kind of
Yeah.
closed society, communism, authoritarianism, and promoting like his free trade, open society, neoliberal values like aggressively and often at
Mm,
multiple points throughout, like through culture, through economic development, through technological shit. Like it's like a full spectrum assault. So yeah, anyways, you can probably speak on that of like the Sorosites in Ukraine. Like
mm.
they're real. What's up with them?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, I think one of the best illustrations of just how real they are was earlier this year. It was like a couple months ago. There was a law that was passed by the cabinet of Ukraine, which exempted 133 NGOs from mobilization in the war.
Right.
Because this is a huge thing. Because
Yeah.
everyone, everyone's getting snatched out on the street and shoved into a bus and taken to the front line, and like and people often die of the beatings they receive in the mobilization office. I've written about these stories, they're incredibly harrowing. And these are always just
Right.
poor people. There was there's an interview recently by this soldier said that 90% of the people at the front line, they are poor villagers, like were forcibly mobilized, had no choice,
Older
had no
men.
motivation. Older men from small villages, from rural areas, very poor, and these are places where like the average wages, it's like, $100 a month, whatever, even less people are. And but anyway, and these starter sites, they're officially exempted from mobilization. And you have like, organizations there like International Renaissance Foundation, which is the Soros thing, all kinds of different things. And we should go through like, some of the
That was a
interesting
great
stuff. I mean,
article.
like,
The 133 company article was great. I read that last
so
night. Let me see.
Raytheon is also exempted. I forgot to mention that in my
Deloitte and
article.
Touche. There's
Raytheon,
like, why are there like
Deloitte,
40 shell companies of different variations of Deloitte and
yes.
Touche LLCs that are all exempted from? It's like, they're an
So many
accounting firm.
consulting firms.
Yeah, so
So
many
many
consulting
consulting
firms. They're
firms.
all exempt. So none of
Yeah.
these people who can sit in Kiev in their little like WeWork cafes and tweet Slava Ukraini all day and cheer the war on to the very end. You've also made the point that especially at this stage in the war that surprisingly a lot of the like Azov Nazi type
Mm,
nationalists
mm,
are actually more
mm.
willing to entertain the idea of a
Absolutely.
ceasefire, and the real hardcore like to the
Yeah.
bitter enders are like the Sorosite slash
Yeah.
Atlanticist type people who are like the most dead set on continuing the war till like every Ukrainian is
100%.
like dead, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like, that's a really interesting thing. I mean, and I think lots of this is just because, I mean, these Sarasites, they're not fighting in the war, right? They're all exempted from mobilization. There's been a bunch of scandals about how, like, the most famous, like, anti-corruption NGO, Maidan warriors, like this guy Vitaly Shabunin, Butusov, this big, I mean, he's like a military journalist, but he's like in the same crowd. Yuri Nikolov, all these guys. These are all like anti-corruption journalists. They're all funded. I mean, Butusov's a bit different, but like Nikolov, Shabunin, they're all funded by. If you look at their websites, the general, like or Shabunin is this from this really big ANTAC, this anti-corruption group, all these anti-corruption NGOs that were set up after Maidan, whose main purpose is to stop like industrial protectionism and so on, and also to like gather dirt on any like pro-Russian politicians, any politicians that don't want Ukraine to become like a suicide kamikaze missile, basically. Anyway, and but they have like just ridiculous health conditions for which they don't have to serve. Like I mean, Butusa, who's
Flat
like a military
feet.
journalist. Yeah,
Uh,
flat feet is one of them. But like, it's ridiculous because in reality, if you're poor, you can be blind, you get mobilized. I had a story about a blind guy that was mobilized, sent to the front
Jesus.
line, right? Like, and he was like, his friend was desperately calling for help on Facebook because he's like, this guy is blind. I mean, like, he kind of he like kind of volunteered to be a chef at the, far from the front, but then they
Hmm.
just took him, sent him to the front lines. And, like,
Jesus.
there's so much, I mean, like, I remember like a couple of months ago, so it's really depressing, like TikTok and it was like a guy with Down syndrome at the front line, and
Oh my
like there
God.
was like bombs going off, and it was just like shit is just so dark, so
That's
bleak,
so
like
bleak. Yeah.
and he was like scared. It was like just so depressing, like so depressing. And but then meanwhile these guys and there are and Shabunian, who's this big anti-corruption, never shuts up about like I found a new corruption scheme that I'm gonna uncover. And it's like who the fuck cares, man? You've had your organizations for like 10 years. Corruption's
Yeah.
worse than ever. You guys are
Right.
totally
Right.
hopeless. This is so hopeless. All you guys do, they played a big role in the Manafort stuff, actually. Anyway, we should get to
In
that later.
exposing
But
Manafort. Oh yeah. No. Interesting.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean that whole
That's
group.
that's their function.
I have a friend from Ukraine who's living.
На Україну небо закрикнем тобі жалюзі. Вони думають, я здуюсь, але в рукаві пару тузів. Запитай мене молодим, ти ж поділ менше води. Не зупиняйся тілом крути, тисну на газ, комета лети. Запитай мене молодим, ти ж поділ менше води. Не зупиняйся тілом крути, тисну на газ, комета лети. На новий седан, поставив я титан. Віддай газку, братан, як у мамки хуліган. На новий седан, поставив я титан. Дай газку, братан.
I have a friend from Ukraine who's living.
What's really interesting, right? And I've noticed this when I'm like searching for the funding sources of these different groups, is that like so a great example is Stop Fake. Stop Fake is it's a whole another story, but Stop Fake was set up by one of the most evil people out there, Uliana Suprun. Oh my God, okay. I should talk about Uliana Suprun a bit later, but like, isn't Stop Fake is just the classic, like, insane nationalist liberal NGO which monitors disinformation. It's actually hired by Facebook to monitor disinformation, and it gets rid of like pro-Soviet shit. And it's run by people who hang out with hardcore Nazis, black metal, who write songs about 6 million lies, and you know, and have a fashion brand called Swastone, where they have like just straight up swastikas and shit, right? Before hipsters and stuff. Anyway, but what's interesting about Stop Fake, the reason I bring it up, is if you look on the English language page for Stop Fake,
right,
it'll mention that it sponsors. Basically, it has some of the sponsors, but then on the Ukrainian language thing, it has other sponsors that aren't in the
which I believe it is like I remember seeing this article. It just says U.S. Embassy in Kiev or something like that. Like,
yeah. I mean, like let me just
openly on the Ukrainian side, but then they hide it from the English language.
And this is the same thing for lots of different things. Also for like, what's it, State Watch? That's a really big one. That's also really involved in the OCCRP shit. And like, they'll often, like, I mean, I'll just, because I mean, different Western, you know, journalists, they'll like ask me to help them out with whatever, do some research. And I'll like be looking into these groups. And it's just always so impressive how much of a difference there is between the Ukrainian language, the same page, the same website. So it's like, the international, so like the Ukrainian language version has the National Endowment for Democracy, German Marshall Fund, and the National Democratic Initiative as sponsors of Stop Fake. All of these are missing from the English language version. On the English language version, it just has International Renaissance Foundation, which is the Soros thing, and then Foreign Ministry of Czech Republic, Embassy of UK. But in reality, it's actually the NED and so on. It's actually, yeah. Anyway, this is very, very common. I found where the Ukrainian language has all these other responses you can't find on there. And generally, they because in Ukraine it's a really big political thing before the war, but now as well. Arguments about like Sarasites, and they have this whole term in Ukrainian or in Russian, Ukrainian Sarasyato, which is like pun because it sounds like a piglet. So it's like Soros's little piglets.
Soros,
Anyway,
Soros piglet.
yeah,
that's funny.
and everyone's always, yeah. I think it's funny. That's kind of why I use the term Sarasite, just because I think of that term in Russian.
In English, it sounds like parasite, which honestly is like apt. I think, you know.
But the conflict with the Azovites is really interesting because the Azov, it's the thing with I mean, they already had conflict. The Azov guys, they were protected by Arsen Avakov, who's the interior minister of Ukraine, 2014, 2021. Very important guy, played a big role in Maidan, sniper massacre, and so on. An Armenian oligarch, actually, who's Russian speaking, born in Armenia, but he's like he was the one that bankrolled the Azov battalion. He actually used Azov in the 2000s, what would later become Azov, as like his private security, well, not security. Basically, they attacked his rival businesses in Kharkiv,
like an armed paramilitary gang, kind of, right?
Yeah, I mean, this was where these groups kind of emerged from in the 2000s. When they were all in like Eastern Ukraine and so on, where you have all these big businesses and like oligarch wars and so on. And then you also had these like football hooligan community, which was really huge in Russia as well. And most of them are like hardcore Nazis and so on. And in Russia in the 2000s, they were really hardcore, like killing hundreds and hundreds of, Muslim migrants from Central Asia, literally hundreds each year. They would be just murdering them on camera, like decapitating them and stuff, like really, really insane stuff. But then Putin started cracking down on them, around 2011, because they joined in anti-government protests, and they were allying with Navalny as well, right? This was a big thing.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and, Mr. Chechens are cockroaches, right?
Yeah.
And but then the big turning point was in 2014, Ukrainian Euromaidan, and they really supported Euromaidan because it's like, it's an ethnic revolution, ethnic homogenization, as opposed to like Russian neo-Bolshevik federalism, where every nation has, rights or whatever the fuck. Anyway, and lots of them went to Ukraine to fight on Ukrainian side. Obviously, some fought on the Russian side as well, but the majority went to the Ukrainian side. Yeah. And then after 2014, so many of them came to Ukraine, and lots of them play quite important roles in Azov and so on. Quite well-known people. And my point was that they were used as muscle against rival businesses in the 2000s. These football hooligans with right-wing views. But then after Maidan, they became much more influential. Anyway, but with Avakov, who's the patron of Azov, he was in conflict with the Sarasites. He was interior minister, but the Sarasites, they were releasing like corruption. There was this scandal about like his son, Avakov's son, had like a backpack company that was supplying expensive backpacks to the Interior Ministry and corruption, blah blah. And then what happened was there was an interesting split in like the right wing movement where like Gonor emerged, or Honor or whatever the fuck, which is actually like a Polish nobility bullshit term. But anyway, but they. And this is like Sergei Sternyenko, all these guys these are really allied with Sufrun. And these are like, they're kind of like LGBT Nazis, This is what the Azov guys call them anyway, because they're like, they hang out with all of these, left liberal Sarosite guys and so on. And they're not anti-gay anymore. They're like, oh, who cares? And they had lots of big conflicts. Azov kicked them out. And then these Gonor guys, they participated in all of these protests against Avakov. They called Avakov like the devil. Avakov eventually left. And then, I mean, I'm sure lots of it was over like dividing up different criminal income. They had a big like conflict as well over like these clubs, raiding clubs to try and find drugs, but like raiding gay clubs. And the Azov guys were doing this. But then the Sternyenko and the liberal Nazi guys, they were like, no, we shouldn't do this, because they were kind of allied with the clubs and the people that own the clubs and so on. but I mean, they're all totally fucked. I mean, like the liberal Nazis, as well. They're, they have swastika tattoos and stuff. And there's like, for instance, there's this one guy who was friends with, I mean, he's works with Sternyenko, Patashenko, and he has a huge swastika tattoo. He works a lot with the EU-based European Security Academy. There's a really interesting Bellingcat article about these guys. It's this organization. They mainly just hire all these Ukrainian Nazis and Eastern Polish. There's lots of it in Poland as well, and it's some kind of private military company that travels around the world. And there was a Bellingcat article about it like quite a while ago. But so I mean, these like liberal Nazis are totally. But they went as well also to Hong Kong protests as well. By the way,
oh, not surprising. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
yeah.
fascinating. The liberal.
Yeah, I mean, like
Nazis.
Sternyenko is also he was charged with lots of drug dealing and so on in after Maidan. He was the head of Pravi sector in Maidan, so in Odessa. He also has never, and the difference, I guess, between the liberal, like right wing guys, the Sorosite kind of allied ones, is that they don't really fight so much. I mean, some of them do. Some of them, they have their own kind of battalion as well. But Sternyenko doesn't fight at all, and he's like this hardcore grifter. And then the Azov guys, they do fight.
Yeah.
And lots of them, dying and so on, right? And they kind of present themselves as being this kind of, military experts and so on, which is probably true. I mean, they've gotten lots of good, foreign training, and they have been fighting for a really long time.
Right.
And so they're really beloved by the media in like the liberal. Everyone loves them in Ukraine because they're like super. They were smart, and they know what to do, and they're always criticizing like the corrupt generals. They have lots of yeah. I mean, like, and I mean, I get it. Like, look, if you're like if you want to be some kind of hardcore nationalist, then I mean, Azov is probably the best option for you, right? Like they're totally, I think suicidal and crazy as well, but they're basically openly one of the most interesting Telegram channels that I follow is Tales of the Fourth Reich. It's now Tales of the Fourth Empire. Tales of the Fourth Reich for a while. This is like an Azov guy. He actually used to be an Antifa guy, which is really crazy. And there's this whole interview that I found with him, and he says that then he joined, and this is the whole sort of he joined in Maidan, and then he gave this interview. He's like, I'm still anti-fascist, but only as an anti-racist. But I also like Mussolini, and Valhalla is waiting for all of us. Like I don't know, So he went this whole evolution, but this was based on his hatred of like East Ukrainians, who he says that they have like Soviet imperial mentality. Anyway, so it's like but he's been posting a lot of stuff, calling for a ceasefire, and this is the other thing that's really important. They support Trump, like Azov and these guys. They all like Trump, and they think that they hope that Trump is going to bring a ceasefire to Ukraine, because they worry that the Ukrainian state and army will like collapse totally. And they call the Sorosites, and obviously the Sorosites, they're all totally allied with the Democratic Party and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they like the Tales of the Fourth Reich guy. He calls the Sorosite guys jihadists, for instance, because he thinks that they just want endless war, but like totally destroying like us as a nation and so on. He often brings up statistics of how many Ukrainians. He calculated a couple months ago that like 120,000 Ukrainians have been killed at minimum based on like his home province. How many people are killed in the news and stuff.
And he's kind of upset that like a lot of the Azov battalion people who are going to fight, like they're being killed. It almost has it sounds like a little bit of a paranoid tinge of like, you want us all to go and like get killed so 100%. You can get us out of the way. You Sorosite like nationalist, and then
because also about Zelensky, because I mean this is the thing that like this was back when there was the siege of Mariupol and stuff, right? Like lots of the pro Azov people, they were saying like basically Zelensky wants us to be surrounded and killed in Mariupol because we're his biggest enemy and competitor. And he's getting us out of the way by doing this and by not sending by not saving us or whatever. But I mean, like, obviously it's bullshit. There's no way to save them anyway. But I mean, like, but they do have this whole, I think it's true. Like, I mean, it definitely is that dynamic. So yeah, and they basically, I mean, look, obviously, if you look at like the official, I mean, now officially even the official Azov leaders are saying, look, the retaking the 1991 borders, which was Zelensky's, slogan, is impossible. We need
Right.
to focus on saving the lives of our troops. And also, I mean, there's this big problem where it's like the most like effective and experienced commanders, they're all getting killed, and they're being replaced with totally incompetent people. And this is a big thing that they talk about. There was an
Right.
interesting, and there are no like training centers in Ukraine. There was a really interesting thing. There was this is famous this old general in the army who was a general, and he was like Krivonos. He was like the head of one of the top generals in the army under Poroshenko. So like before 2019, he was removed, and he like left in 2020 or so. And he had this interesting statistic about how like Russia has something like 500 training centers for new officers, but Ukraine has made none over the past couple of years, which just means that they're just exhausting all of their best personnel
Right.
and being replaced by these like zombie battalions where there's lots of fictitious people and there's no real commander and so on. Anyway, so
Yeah.
lots of these like nationalists are really calling for there to be some kind of, but I mean, but the reason why I'm not really optimistic about this is because the reason there's a war is because Russia doesn't want Ukraine in NATO. But
Right.
there's still, I mean, the Tales of the Fourth Reich guy is saying, look, NATO's unrealistic. They're not going to take us. We got to just abandon this demand because Russia doesn't want it. We just need to we need to recover our armies so that we have some way to resist the next war or whatever.
Hmm.
But the thing is that Russia also wants the Ukrainian army to be made a lot smaller. And I just think that the current balance of forces at the front line, where it's like Russia is advancing, Ukraine is weakening. And so, and I just think that, like, and you see these stupid Western op-eds in the New York Times where it's like, Ukraine can join NATO, but the rest of Ukraine will go to Russia. It just makes no sense at all. Like, why would Russia
Right.
let Ukraine join NATO? What line are you going to draw? What happens if Russia starts shooting? It's like,
Yeah, it's
they
insane.
continue.
It's
I don't know.
insane. Like,
It's all really bullshit. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. I think what'll happen is Trump will try and present some like ceasefire deal. Russia will say no, no need to, and we're winning anyway. And then Trump will like give nukes to Ukraine or some shit.
Like he'll get pissed
this
off that Russia is not that interested, and then he'll try to
yeah.
lash out, and yeah, like
Maybe not. Maybe he won't care. Maybe he's like, I don't know. It could be either way. But I mean, that seems more likely to me than just some kind of cordial agreement. It's like the Democrats where they're like saying, oh, Russia, Trump and Putin are best friends. They'll just come to an agreement. It'll be all done. It's like
yeah, I'm not
there was
so
an
yeah, I'm not so
interesting.
optimistic that like that's what's going on here exactly. Like
Yeah.
they both have their own
wonder,
interests. I don't know.
I wonder
Yeah,
if
exactly.
because Zelensky's position is weaker, Trump will just like lean on him to like accept some like extreme concession that will like set Putin up. Like that's what I would almost, because I feel like Trump wants to be perceived as someone who can make any deal, like, and the idea
Yeah.
of not being able to make a deal would upset his vanity.
That is true.
So I
it
wonder
kinda
like if he'll
hinges
like
on-
force it somehow. Like, yeah, one
Th-
side
that's
has
the
to just
thing.
basically give up everything that they want.
Yeah. But he has
Um,
to force, I guess, Zelensky to give up enough to actually satisfy Russia to be like, okay, we'll stop. Whereas it's not necessarily clear because like the terms they're floating right now are like not, I think Lavrov said that yesterday, are just like
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like they're not,
Yeah.
they're non-starters,
Mhm.
basically like, oh, we should give up all the territory we're currently holding and like
Yeah.
retreat back to like the 2022 borders and then something else like question mark profit. Like, no, like,
Do you
so
think-
if he gives them, if he offers that, Trump might think it's a great deal, but like if Russia
Yeah.
is just like no, then
Well, do you think?
what
What do you
happens
think that
next? I don't know.
Ukraine would give up, if anything? Will they also just not give up anything? Like they'll just dig in. Like they won't give up any
Because look-
territory to Russia. Or Zelensky.
I mean, look, the Russian official demand is full control over the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia. What's the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions? These were the demands they announced, like back in, I think it was September 2022. Let me just get this shit up, just 'cause it's like woke up early in the morning, my brain's not really working totally. So it's it was like Zaporizhia region. So even Zaporizhia region, like. I mean, Russia controls most of it right now, but then it doesn't control the capital, which is Zaporizhia, the city itself. And this is one of Ukraine's biggest industrial cities. It's like got a population of 700,000, right? It's a huge city. So Russia wants total control over that. And they also want pretty sure they want the whole Dnipropetrovsk region as well. I might be wrong about that. Pretty sure they do. Dnipropetrovsk, it's Ukraine's last industrial region, basically. Like Ukraine's big three industrial regions are Donetsk, Lugansk, and Dnipropetrovsk. This is where 70% of the GDP is generated, always, right? It's always been this way. And so, I mean, like, I just don't think there's any way in which they could agree to this. It would just be like, I mean, maybe it just seems very improbable. I mean,
what do you think would happen to Zelensky if he did agree to that?
Yeah. So no, they're not claiming the Dnipropetrovsk region. They're just claiming the Zaporizhia region. And I mean, but the Zaporizhia region is like, it's really important, that city, taking that city. But like they do seem like they're going to try and take the Dnipropetrovsk region. They're very close already they're like 5 kilometers away now from the Dnipropetrovsk region border. And that's huge. Entering the Dnipropetrovsk region, that's like, realistically, if Russia takes like Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia, it's kind of over for Ukraine. I don't know. Like, I mean, it's just that they're in kind of the middle of Ukraine, and it kind of splits the Ukrainian forces north and south. And also just industrially, they're so important. And after that, it's just plain. And anyway, I mean, like, but they're already so close to those cities. It's really, I don't know. They're like, these are, you know, the top 3 most important cities in Ukraine, really, like these cities. Anyway, but if Zelensky agreed to that, look, there's this whole idea of like, you know, the right wing rebellion against Zelensky signing a ceasefire agreement.
Like they'll kill him.
On the one hand, they'll kill him. Yeah, yeah.
They'll kill
like,
him. Yeah.
We speculated about that in our last Ukraine episode, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They definitely were like they were definitely protesting like in 2021, 2020. They were protesting against the Minsk agreements. They were like, if you do this, we'll kill you and so on. And they definitely played a big role in stopping any of Zelensky's intentions to possibly implement the Minsk agreements. They played a big role in that. Right now, the thing is, like, as I'm saying, like the Azov guys, like they kind of do want a ceasefire. Right? They do want a ceasefire, and they think that endless war is bad, like it's destroying their own forces, and it's setting up the potential for like, you know, a total collapse or whatever. In terms of handing over large chunks of territory, yeah, I mean, I feel like they would be very unhappy about that. It's all very hard to predict, because the thing is, if there was going to be some kind of like military coup, it's going to be sanctioned by the US. It's going to be like organized and sanctioned by the US. It's like with the Vietnam thing, you know, when there was the South Vietnam coup and all that sort of thing. And that was all organized by it wasn't like, you know, this is totally all the processes are under control of the West, essentially. And like, and if the West wants Ukraine to agree to some, you know, humiliating deal with Russia, I don't see why they would allow a coup to reverse that deal. Doesn't really make sense to me. And then, like, if the Azovites anyway, I don't think they want to give up, like, Zaporizhia or whatever. But I think that if the US wants something to happen, the Azovites are not going to have much of a choice in the matter. I mean, I've listened to, like, Ukrainian journalists, like, in Ukraine, like, kind of pro-government, but sort of critical as well, talk about this thing of, like, could there be a civil war? There was and they say that, like, after the peace, there could be a civil war. They think there will be a civil war. This is, like, a common thing, that there will probably be some kind of hardcore civil war or something after a peace is signed, just because everyone's demobilized, the millions of traumatized, angry people, blah blah blah. But what did we fight for? Fight for nothing. But in terms of actually signing the peace, giving up the territory, it's like the question is like, who would fight? Who would fight to stop that? I mean, it's like, who would take up arms in order to stop that? It's like so many frontline soldiers are really, really tired of the way things are at the moment, and they really see things as totally hopeless and pointless. Like I know a guy, like I wrote about this, like this guy that I used to know. He's in Azov. I don't talk with him anymore, but I talk with a guy that is his best friend who's left to Europe, and he's totally pessimistic about everything in Ukraine. He's like, it's all a scam. Ukrainians, we're all slaves. We don't give a fuck. We just do what people tell us to. He's like in Western Europe now, well, in Eastern Europe, anyway. in an EU country, in a pro-NATO EU country, not in Hungary or whatever, but like in a pro-Atlanticist, whatever the fuck, But anyway, so I do find it somewhat difficult to imagine there would be some that the obstacle to achieving a real ceasefire would be like Ukrainian nationalists. I find it more likely that Ukrainian nationalists would launch a coup against Zelensky in order to implement a ceasefire. Because the way I see things, and like which would be supported by the West, and like who knows, but like
throw
the
Zelensky
way,
out to dry, basically,
yeah,
as kind of
yeah, or like I don't know, some kind of coup in order to just maximally mobilize everything and throw the kids at the front line, whatever the fuck, like that, with Azov guys, maybe that could happen. They always say we need to mobilize more people, whatever. But like
where are the Sorosites
yeah.
in all of this? I just want to say, now that Trump is coming back in, do you foresee a
The Sorosites,
possibility of like a kind of a
yeah,
little bit of a deep state divergence between like what the Trump administration is like directing the U.S. government to do? Let's say get Ukraine to like accept a ceasefire, but then the Sorosites, who seem to be at this point the most hardcore faction in Ukraine that want the war to keep going, is there a way that they're able to like lean on Zelensky to get him to keep doing the war, or somehow sabotage? I mean, I guess none of them fight, and they're all just hanging out on their laptops in Kiev. So like
they don't really do anything.
Yeah,
they don't really do like I don't know. Like
do
they
they
don't
have
really
juice to do anything? I guess not.
they don't have really just anything. Like they have their friends like Sternyenko. All of these guys are total grifters. This is the thing. There are so many conspiracies about how the Sorosites, they like work for Zelensky, even though that they always criticize Zelensky. And I think there's a truth to this. There are even conspiracies that like the OG Sorosites, like Mustafa Nayem and stuff, that they were working for like the Yanukovych government or elements in the Yanukovych government. And I think that there's definitely a lot of truth to that, particularly this guy, this really important bloody anyway, this really important guy in Yanukovych's government who defected from the government and he's still around. He's this big power node or whatever. Anyway, like their whole thing is they're always releasing like, corruption, scandal, information, and it's like it's always obvious this is serving someone's interest. And it's not like, just it's always
They're
targeted.
not just
always,
an umpire calling balls and strikes like all these groups like Amnesty, all these kind of groups like this is a common tactic of these types of corruption anti-corruption NGOs, right?
Yeah. But like they don't really like they can complain about all they do is complain. They're always complaining like, oh, the people don't care enough, the West doesn't care enough. But it's like they're not making the decisions at all. And I think like look, the real resistance to some kind of ceasefire is really coming from the Zelensky elite. This is really and this is an argument that I make in my Substack a lot, because like Zelensky himself and his like inner coterie of like Yermak, Tatarov and stuff, where these guys are really, really hated in society. Like right now, some poll came out showing us like 16% of Ukrainians would vote for Zelensky again or whatever else. And
Right.
and all of the like the Sorosites are always making fun of him. The Azov guys like make fun of him all the time, and everyone just really is really hating on him. And like more importantly, like he's gone really hardcore against the oligarch class in wartime, against Kolomoisky. Like my last post from yesterday, whatever, it's about Kolomoisky, who originally Igor Kolomoisky, like the most kind of important, one of the most important oligarchs in Ukraine, who originally brought Zelensky to power in 2019, and he was actually, coincidentally, right after Kolomoisky began fighting with President Poroshenko in 2015. Right around that time, he started releasing the TV show Seventh of the People on Kolomoisky's
That's
TV
right.
channel.
We talked about this. With
Zelensky.
Predictive programming as TV show.
Exactly. Yeah. It's incredible. It's like there's a new book about Zelensky that came out recently by this Ukrainian political analyst. It's called The Joker. It's about Zelensky, and it's about how Zelensky is this ultimate postmodern figure. And it's incredible. Like he was created as this sort of he was obviously a big comedian before that anyway. But Kolomoisky kind of brought him to power in order to stop Poroshenko from like stealing Kolomoisky's assets, whatever. But then at some point, and it's a really interesting question as to why and how, but Zelensky became out of control. Like, it's kind of like a golem, right? Even though he's Jewish himself, but like, and I mean, Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky is a Shabbat guy.
Yeah, we
like
I think we touched on that. We didn't really clock the significance of it back in 2022, but he gave a lot of money to Chabad people in the U.S., right? In Cleveland and New York, particularly.
Yeah. And I mean, well, because the other thing, I mean, Kolomoisky is anyway, but just to finish this line of thought, which is that, and Zelensky put him in jail, right? He's been in jail for a year now, and he's nationalized all of Kolomoisky's companies. Like, this is like, you do not want to piss off Kolomoisky. This guy's insane. This guy's like the most like stereotypical post-Soviet, mafiosi who's, anyway, this guy is really legit, right? And Zelensky and another example, and Kolomoisky just this month, December, he's finally broken his silence, and he's been accusing Zelensky of raider takeovers and blackmailing Kolomoisky by removing his citizenship and trying to force him to pay all this money to the government and so on. And it's quite obvious because Kolomoisky has good connections with Trump. Kolomoisky's people, politicians like Dubinsky, who's also in jail, and Dept, who's now in Russia, they cooperated closely with Rudy Giuliani over the Hunter Biden stuff in 2019. And Kolomoisky also has good relations with Trump through this guy, Boris Epstein. He's some kind of, he's this figure in the US.
Boris Epstein, and mysterious kind of fixer guy for Trump.
Classic. I mean, it's like a classic, post-Soviet Russian Jewish mobster guy, and he's like which is exactly Kolomoisky's deal anyway. So
right.
And so apparently, like the rumors this past couple of days is that Kolomoisky is reaching out to Trump through Boris Epstein, because I mean, Kolomoisky just has so much debt, right? He has debt on everything. He's a genius, right? Like he's got everything. And I'm sure that Trump will be happy to have something. I mean, some more stuff about Hunter. Why not? And more stuff about, Democrat shit going on. So I think Kolomoisky's trying to make clear, like, look, I'm a useful person. But what my point is, these people are enraged with Zelensky. Like, I mean, Kolomoisky's business partner, Gennady Bogolubov, one of the biggest also Ukrainian oligarchs, businessmen, whatever. He left Ukraine this year, like illegally, whatever, he escaped. But he gave an interview saying that the Zelensky government demanded $100 million bribe, like extortion money, in exchange for him not to go to prison. This is in 2023. This is the type of stuff that business has been putting up with in wartime. And there's so many stories about this, like all of just like, secret services that are just extorting them super hard.
This is the you're doing business with the enemy act kind of thing, right? That they're just using to systematically shake down everybody left and right. Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, exactly. Like really hard. I mean, this was always a thing in Ukraine, and this was also a purpose of like the right-wing groups where they'll come to your business and say you're funding Russian separatists, and then obviously it's just the rival businessmen. I mean, this is a funny thing. Like, so I met this Romanian restaurateur at the start of the war in a bomb shelter, and I met this Ghanaian like music producer outside of a shop in like day 2 of the war. Because like I don't know, I became friends with different African guys in Ukraine, and I don't know. I just like hanging out with them. It's interesting. I like Africa. I like African history. It's interesting. And I saw this black guy look kind of confused, and there was this other African woman outside of my house on the first day of the war. She didn't even know there was a war going on because she didn't know Russian or Ukrainian. I was like, there's a war starting. You got to go to the bomb shelter. Like, oh shit. But I saw this other black guy outside of a shop, and I was like, how you going? What's going on? He's like, yeah. We started chatting, and he took me to his bomb shelter. I met his wife, who's like a Chinese loan shark. She can't work in China because she charges loans with the interest too high. But in Ukraine, there's no limit. So they went to Ukraine to charge but she was really nice, But then it was in this like big penthouse next like we were just in an ordinary apartment, but there was this big penthouse kind of in this square nearby, and we were in this cool like bomb shelter they had. But then this crazy Romanian guy comes in. It's like, hey, and he gave us all this expensive cheese and sausages, and he's like, I've been doing coke in my penthouse the past 3 days, watching the rockets fly. He's like, I'm the last patriot in Ukraine. Everyone else has left, but I was staying here forever. And I went up to his penthouse, and he had like coke everywhere, and I like, a little swell, whatever. And but like straight up in the first couple of days, you could see like there was some just crazy shit happen in the first couple of days of the war. Like a Russian tank like alone, just drove into Kiev and had like a firefight and then got destroyed. And apparently it was like a National Guard tank. So it was
Oh
like a
my God.
police guy who just like decided to like fuck it, you know. And he
Wow.
was watching that from his penthouse, and there was like an artillery battle inside of like 2 kilometers away. Who was this? How did they get artillery into the city? Who knows? Anyway, he was watching this shit, and then he was taking journalists to the front line. But I started talking with him, and I brought this up just because he had this great story of like his business, his like a rival Ukrainian restaurateur accused him, this was like a couple of years ago, of like sponsoring Russian terrorists as a way to like get rid of his business. And he had like connections in the secret services, and the secret services came to my Romanian friend's business, was like, oh, we're gonna fuck you up, you gotta, close your business. But he told me, but it's okay. I'm Romanian. I know how this shit works. I figured it out, But so anyways, it's like a whole systemic thing. But in wartime, this stuff has just gone through the roof because they have total power, right? So basically my point is Zelensky knows if he loses his like dictatorial power, like he's done. He's not even politically dead. He's probably like gonna just die straight up, right? Like
There's a long
he's
list
made
of
some
people that would want to get even with him. Right.
100%. Like
yeah. He's trapped. He is the
he's
servant
totally
of the
trapped.
people is trapped
Yeah.
in the role of a
That's right.
lifetime.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's got to get
Yeah.
renewed for another season. He just got to stay
Right.
on the air, like because as soon as the lights
That's the
go
thing.
down, it's curtains
That's the
for
thing.
him. I mean,
Well, like most of the logic of this war, it's just creating new media spectacles to like continue this thing going on. There's no like strategic aspect to it at all. It's just Zelensky like,
yeah.
how do I create a new epic thing that
It's very
convinces
vibes
people
based,
that's still going
honestly.
on?
Yeah, it's like you've done a lot of like collected a lot of work from like telegrams and stuff and like driven home the point that like a big problem with Ukraine is like they don't actually have like a structured army the way that like Russia or other modern militaries have. They have these like brigade or battalion strength like autonomous units just sort of roaming around, like not always communicating with each other, not knowing like where supply lines are and like other things like that. So it just ends up like these bands of people that are just like rampaging around, like fighting pitched battles with the Russians, which obviously leads to a lot of them getting like wiped out and a lot of like corruption from these like it's kind of like a system of like technologically enhanced like warlordism in a certain kind of way. But
Yeah.
that's at least what it sounds like from your reporting.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a really big target of criticism by Azov and stuff. They're always talking about like, the problem of organizational chaos in the army. We need and everyone always brings up Azov as like this ultimate perfect example of like they have the good organization and they have like good discipline and genius commanders and so on. But yeah, and I mean, lots of this like this organizational chaos, and this was brought up by a big like Sorosite journalist in a big discussion they had with Azov guys. I mean, I should make it clear that like the Sorosite guys, like they love Azov. They say that Azov's the best and stuff.
Right.
And like as Azovite guys, they're always going on this big Sorosite, media channels and having big, hot round table discussions and so on. It's just that like in some of because like Tales of the Fourth Reich, this is like an anonymous telegram. Like it's clear kind of who it is. And I mean, but you can see, and I mean, some of the Sorosites as well, like they're sort of saying, at least the bigger journalists, like they criticize 991 Borders a little bit at least, but you can still see differences in the rhetoric, in the discourse. And then there are some of these anonymous channels that are much more open about their differences. But anyway, but like they bring up Azov as this great organizational example, but also this like, the Sorosite journalist, one of the editors of Ukrainska Pravda, the biggest sort of liberal media, it's like the Ukrainian New York Times, funded by the Open Society and so on, USA. And he was saying how this just mirrors Ukrainian society, well, Ukrainian corruption in general, where it's like you have just a bunch of weird networks of patronage networks, and that's how the army works as well, basically, where you don't have like some kind of clear division of responsibilities and logical sort of larger groupings, whatever. You just have a bunch of weird little networks and nodes that don't really have much connection to each other, apart from in terms of appropriating funds and so on. But I guess the reason why this could continue for a while is just because with drone warfare and so on, it's quite easy to stop mechanized assaults. Like you're able, even with these cheap drone technologies, and they always say, the Ukrainians, like if it wasn't for drones, we would be like we wouldn't have no territory left, basically. But with drones, I mean, both sides has them. it just makes it quite difficult to advance. It is still possible with small like infantry groups, which is what Russia's
That's
been
what
doing.
the moped motorcycle assaults are happening
Mopeds,
now, right?
yeah,
Russia's
golf
using
buggies apparently,
golf
yeah,
buggies.
yeah,
Yeah,
all kinds of stuff.
yeah,
They
yeah.
also use horses. Some of the there's like
Really?
there are some like there are some troops, the Buryat group, they're like this Asian kind of Mongolian
Oh
Buddhist
yeah,
group in Russia, and they're hot, they're like
they're
what's it, the
excellent horseback. Yeah, we've been to
steppe
Mongolia
warriors.
before. Like those
Oh yeah,
those fools know how to ride horses, like for sure.
that's right.
They're
And those
horse
horses are
masters.
small and they carry lots of weight,
Yeah,
and so
they are
they've been actually
tiny.
using them
They're
at the
little
front line.
horses. Yeah, they're like
They've
donkeys.
used them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they use them at the front line a bit because they're also silent, so they don't alert
Oh.
the other side. Unlike a car or a small,
A
there
motorcycle
was
is
a
super loud. You can't hear a drone
yeah.
coming, right? If you have a loud motorcycle engine, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes like there was a thing on Russian like state TV about this, how like these Buryat fighters are using these horses. But it is like, slow, long fighting, but the drones make it possible to yeah, they really slow it down. And
So
also these are
yeah.
defenses that have been prepared for like, years often, but now they're moving into like less well created defenses now. But anyway, it's all
Спациками на ланоси, коли де дощ, світлофори на паузі. Ми заходим дріфт, спациками на ланоси. Коли де дощ, світлофори на паузі. Ми заходим дріфт, спациками на ланоси. Коли де дощ, світлофори на паузі. Ми заходим дріфт, спациками на ланоси. Біт так лупить, ніби п'яний бать. Нас чекають дівчата на хаті. Повний парті, буми багаті. Лаве накаче, летимо на паті. Я душу газ, ніби це рестлінг. Автопілот, залиште Теслі. Мої паці викупають мене безслів. Обганяє, підрізає, наче Месі. Коли де дощ, світлофори на паузі. Заходим дріфт, спациками на ланоси. Коли де дощ, світлофори на паузі. Заходим дріфт, спациками на ланоси. Коли де дощ, світлофори на паузі. Ми заходим дріфт, спациками на ланоси. Коли де дощ, світлофори на паузі. Ми заходим дріфт, спациками на ланоси.
Синій ланос у режимі дріфт, ця ляля не нова, вона мілф, ми на висоті, ніби ліфт, сорі, не розчув, що ти хотів, музика в салоні валить, ніби караоке, за вікном пролітають незнайомі блоки, ми робимо справи тут, кожен брокер, у кишені твій карти, але я не про покер,
Коли де дощ, світлофори на паузі. Ми заходим дріфт, з пациками на ланосі. Коли де дощ, світлофори на паузі. Ми заходим дріфт, з пациками на ланосі.
If you don't mind for a second, I'd like to read a little bit from a little more from your Monday Meth Come Down article, to get in kind of the sociology of both these kind of groups, like the sort of Azovites and the sort of liberal Hitlerite Sorosite people, and the kind of culture aspect. Because I know in the kind of outline you sent me, the very first thing I think you put for like SJ podcast topics, the PSYWAR aspect of Maidan, war, traumatize people through mediatized violence, turn them into killers. C14 guy, we join the movement to find ourselves. Now that is interesting. I guess I want to maybe tie that in to what you talk about in this piece. There's one particular like name drop in it that I found, considering what some of my interests have been lately, I found very interesting, and we maybe could build off that. But this is under this section, civilized values, where you write, I think you're referring to a period before the war started when you were in Kiev. You say, I'd had a party in my apartment the Friday before with my local friends, inviting everyone. Among them was the Afro-Ukrainian model who was kind enough to share his white powder with the host. Then right after, my friend started DJing with a swastika on his laptop formed out of duct tape. Sometimes one can get in a bit too deep and start appreciating everything around you as, quote, an interesting phenomenon. But there are better ways to spend a weekend. I stopped talking with that crowd after that weekend, partly because of the swastika, though it didn't seem so serious at the time. But they were an apolitical bunch who do anything for shock value. Times Square. Vibes there. But more because I was tired of that lifestyle. Now he's in the Azov Brigade, renowned for its ideological commitment to the values of ultranationalism, white supremacy, and esoteric paganism. He posts film camera shots of himself with weapons and indie rock music. Now, instead of the usual brands, he shows off his fashionable right sector apparel. How is that all possible, you ask? I think you post a picture of him with a bunch of like right-wing tattoos, kind of military stuff. Then you go on. This is interesting.
They're not even right-wing tattoos, honestly. They're just like hipster
Okay, they're
tattoos.
just like edgy
I was
hipster.
gonna-
Yeah, actually, you're right. They are just
Yeah.
like hipster,
Yeah.
like 2010s tattoos. So you go on. This interests me. Do you remember the Vice documentaries of Kiev, the New Berlin? The 2014 revolution brought Kiev nightlife to a complete standstill. As protests turned into riots and government security forces opened fire on protesters, the country fell into crisis. But out of the ashes of revolution has risen a new generation. And you do post this, I think, ID documentary about like Kiev's new ravers. And it is all about like how there's like the amazing underground rave scene. And you said, indeed, La Luta Continua. The revolution never ended. 2014 Euromaidan was a revolution of Western values. The right to go clubbing all night. Never mind, you could do the same thing in Moscow or Minsk. But it's about the atmosphere. Isn't the rave more exciting when it takes place in the background of catastrophic poverty and social breakdown? The Vice video even notes how its raving hero lost his job because of the post-2014, quote, financial crisis, a nice neutralization, as though the fact that post-Euromaidan Ukraine exceeded Brazilian poverty levels had nothing to do with its ultra-liberal economic policies, like the removal of all price controls on food. The Euromaidan events had a heady mixture of fascists, anarchists, and liberals. Same thing in the clubs. I remember one anarchist who ran a soup kitchen I went to occasionally. She decided not to call the initiative Food Not Bombs. As she explained in an interview, that slogan wasn't appropriate in Ukraine, given that she supported the, quote, anti-terrorist operation in eastern Ukraine. Those people don't like our clubs. They don't like our values. Of course, sometimes a bit of steam gets let off to make it clear who's in control. Just like the Euro-optimist Trotskyists at Euromaidan with their red EU flag got playfully, viciously stomped on a few days in by the dominant fascists, sometimes the club gets a little less cosmopolitan. An old friend, himself from Donetsk, told me about a time around 2016. He was in the club with a friend of South Asian descent, the progressive Nizhny Yerkovska precinct. Some men in big black boots fractured his friend's skull. That's all to say I wasn't particularly surprised when my old drinking friend ended up in Azov. You might have an idea of Azov like the following: a bunch of loser freaks. And you see the classic photos you see on Twitter of them like Sieg Heiling in front of Nazi flags, like a bunch of chud, kind of like soccer hooligan guys. And that isn't to say they don't exist. But in my experience, Azovites are where the hipsters go. If you're in Azov, you have good connections, like my old friend. He didn't care much about politics. He was curious about my Lenin volumes, but he had good connections through his work in the TV industry. And that's the real class character of the ultra-right in Ukraine. Creative class hipsters, coders with enough money to feel superior to the, quote, subhuman masses. It has nothing to do with East and West Ukraine, so commonly invoked on the topic. This friend of mine is a Russian speaker Kievan. He once told me proudly of how his grandfather threw rocks at the Nazis when they occupied the city. I don't think he ended up in Azov because of any clearly defined beliefs, though I'm sure by now he has some. He went because that's where the cool people go. Then a little bit down here, you actually talk about like the massive amounts of the drug culture in Ukraine, which I thought was fascinating. You say, a friend knew another Azovite. This is before the war. He was out of Azov by that point, working at a call center, another right-wing organized crime nexus. I want to revisit that too, the Nazi call centers. He told stories of how he used to do DMT with his trench brothers in Donbass on nights off. Drugs are everywhere in Ukraine. Sprayed everywhere across the walls at the university I worked was graffiti announcing meth and LSD and the appropriate telegram code. In Ukraine and Russia, the drugs aren't sold the way it is elsewhere. I guess you have like dead drops, like spies, where you have hiders, zakladchiki. That's how people pick up drugs. A lot of like meth and weed QR codes, etc. Which is, that's not a good combination. Meth, LSD, that's Charlie Manson's combination, right? Now, here's what I wanted to get to in terms of like culture overlap, because you bring up some people in Zelensky's circle. Sorry, I'm just scrolling down here. Under public users, you talk about, I guess, a recent video of the politician Sergei Leshchenko, who is an advisor to Zelensky, right? And this is a video of him snorting what it looks to be like cocaine or a white powder, right?
From a while ago, but yeah.
A little. This is from November 2021 when violating the COVID lockdowns. Wow, just like Gavin Newsom. But this jumped out at me as very interesting. Given my recent, any of the podcast recent kind of investigations into like the history of electronic music and upcoming ones on raves and techno, etc. I did not know this, but you said this politician, Sergei Leshchenko, who got caught doing cocaine, is the husband of a well-known techno DJ who plays at major European clubs. I was shocked. DJ Nastia, who is like a very big name in techno, kind of global techno EDM, kind of whatever, in the global dance industry. DJ Nastia is like a huge ass figure. And I knew that she was Ukrainian, but I did not know that she was literally married to this like coked out fucking advisor to Zelensky. And that actually, it jogged something in my memory, because I remember, like, what did I remember reading about DJ Nastia is that she went on a huge campaign in 2022 to cancel somebody who's like her contemporary, the Russian techno DJ Nina Kravitz, who...
But she's Ukrainian. Oh, no, okay. Who was the one that she was arguing with? Sorry, she was also arguing with this Ukrainian.
There's another Ukrainian DJ who
she has so many beefs. She has so many beefs.
Yeah, she has so many beefs. She got messy on Instagram, and I guess like 2 months after the war, she posted like, I have information that Nina Kravitz is preparing some kind of interview to clarify her silence. Blah blah blah. She hasn't posted anything in her social media in almost 2 months. This is like a big deal where DJ Nastia, in, you know, just out of her pure like Slava Ukraini in her heart, decided that she was going to cancel Nina Kravitz and get her blacklisted from like Berghain, like all the big clubs and festivals in Europe, and actually got Nina Kravitz. She dropped out of like 3 big summer festivals because like she didn't say it, just because she merely didn't denounce Putler. Like, that was basically the charge. Was
the
that
whole
like
irony is DJ Nastia was playing in Russia until so recently, and people got mad at her. Like this, she was like, she played in Moscow in like 2021. Like,
yeah.
Also, she was,
it's crazy.
Okay, but I'm gonna blow your mind real quick. Is that Leshchenko? He's the guy. That's the whole the Manafort Black Books.
Yes, I noticed that too on his Wikipedia. Like, in fact, this guy goes way fuck. This guy's spooked up as fuck. And if we want to get into rave music as like cultural like EU psyop,
Pirate Party as well.
Yeah, let me just see. Leshchenko, Sergei Leshchenko, Ukrainska Pravda. He was the deputy editor-in-chief in 2002, famous for his investigative journalism on corruption in Ukrainian politics and like stopping censorship, etc., etc. He was on Novyi Kanal. Was that on Kanal? No, that was part of Starlight Media. But it was a Viktor Pinchuk company that he worked for in the beginning. And then, this is interesting, he joined the civil movement Chesno, which is about transparency and accountability. This is 2012. In 2012, he went to the UK as a part of a scholarship program of the John Smith Fellowship. But then guess what? In 2013, 2014, he undertook an internship at the National Endowment for Democracy in Washington, D.C. through the Reagan-Faskell Democracy Fellowship. And in 2013, this is interesting, it's even better. In 2013, he took part in the Draper Hills Summer Fellowship at Stanford University. And then goes back in 2014, presumably after the Maidan, and gets elected as a people's deputy with the Petro Poroshenko party, and then kind of goes on to be like this, you know, influencer, NGO, and eventually government advisor to Zelensky, right? And now isn't he in charge of the state train company or something like that? Or he was for a while. I mean,
he's been given control of all of these different public companies that he has.
Right?
Yeah. That he has. I don't think he's in the train thing anymore. I think he's just. No, he's not in. That was for a while. He might still be, but I'm not. But that was a big. I did an interview actually with a trade union guy from the railways, and the railway guys, they hate him so much because he's just this idiot. He's like Leshchenko is like the paradigmatic Soros. It's like this is just the essence of this phenomenon. And he was in charge of the state railway company, and everyone was getting fired. People getting paid like $200-$300 a month, and he was getting like just insane salary,
$12,000 a month salary.
Yeah.
And accused of running it into the ground. There you go. I guess that's another point of evidence. He didn't
know the size of the Ukrainian railways when he was asked. He was asked at a press conference, like, how big? Like, as like a quiz test. Like, And but yeah, he just mainly goes clubbing a lot. Like we actually went to a club. Like I mean, I wasn't really clubbing at all. We went to a club for the first time in like 2 years in 2021, and he was there because he's just always at the club. He's always clubbing. He's just always just doing it. Yeah, and there was this video of him, snorting whatever. Who knows if that's real? But he's said before he's a big fan of drugs or
I
whatever.
would
You know,
say that like if he's the husband of DJ Nastia, like he's probably doing coke. Like that sounds and he's going to raves all the time. Also like I don't know. I feel like Nastia, she's one of these like TikTok techno, like attractive Eastern. I mean, honestly, like Nina Kravis and her, like kind of two sides. It's like, attractive, like Eastern European girl that makes like intense techno. But I feel like both of them have dabbled, maybe Nastia a little more in a little bit of psytrance, which just sets off my alarm bells in terms of like having problematic politics. Because now I just can't not see it as like psytrance is the problematic subgenre, and I feel like maybe Nastia was like really big and kind of like mainstreaming and even smuggling it into like the techno world of like, what if we put a little psytrance in here? And I just want to say if that's
evil.
what she's doing, it's evil. It's spiritually bad. So and then it is interesting that because like that was funny where if you look at like an institution like Berghain, where I think Nastia, that like she's played there a bunch of times and stuff. One of the only times they made a political statement was like putting Ukraine flags all over like their website and everything. And it's like the rare moment where they like made some kind of specific political statement. And then of course October 7th happens and they just like shut the fuck up like about it.
Yeah.
And it's quite clear they will lose state funding because they get state funding from the federal government if they did anything. And it's not clear if they actually would, because some of those other clubs in Berlin, there was one I went to, I think About Blank, which is like very known as a super Antifa, anti-Deutsch kind of club, right? So like very much that like ultra left kind of thing. Well, they started hosting like our like Nova Festival commemorative like Israeli kind of events, and people were like, what the fuck? And then like they were kind of exposed as being like pro-Zionist essentially, but like they're such heckin' leftist like punk like queer Antifa kind of people. But so there are these like weird fault lines now in like Europe and the EU, and so I mean, wow, I just didn't realize one of the biggest DJs was like directly plugged into the fucking like. You think that would be worth mentioning when she tries to cancel a Russian DJ about like not?
I think
saying
she's. Yeah, she divorced Leshenko at some point in the past 2 years or something. I don't know.
Oh, after the war started?
I don't know when. I can find when exactly. But yeah, they did break up at some point. But it was like quite recently. I mean, I'm not sure if it was after the war started. I feel like
so they got
married. Was after.
They got married in 2017, which kind of corresponds with like I feel like her like ascendancy and the sort of like techno EDM superstardom. This is what she said. It's a picture of her with Lishenko from this is posted in 2018. I finally want to introduce you someone. This is Sergey. We got married in September 2017. Sergey used to be a journalist for 15 years, very much passionate, professional, and experienced. Since 2014, he is a member of Ukrainian parliament. He represents a new generation of politicians in Ukraine fighting against corruption. We met at the Rhythm Bureau Techno Party in Kiev. Sergey is progressive and educated person. He is the only one in our government who understands that underground techno is not for everyone. It can be very deep, intelligent, and conceptual. That's why he is a fan of it. I am very much proud of him, and he is proud of me. No one got such a respect for me as he did. No one support me as he does. He inspire me every day. Heart. Wow. So I don't know. Like they sounded very much in love, but I guess maybe they got divorced.
Yeah. No, they broke up in November 2022. She has some other boyfriend.
A new article from the beginning of this year says that she did divorce him.
Netherlands. Some guy from the Netherlands.
Wow, she got remarried. Yeah, so she broke up with him the year the war started, which is interesting. While she was also trying to cancel Nina Kravis and all this other, just a little messy, but
look. She's got a busy life, man. Respect DJ Nasty. She's traveling the world. She's having a good time. Like no, I mean
not with Lishenko anymore. He's not clubbing with her.
But not Lishenko. No. Yeah. Well, I mean, like Yeah, you mentioned that C14. This is actually really interesting. I had like a conversation. This is like probably can't really the specifics kind of hard to explain, but basically I had a conversation with one of the leaders of C14, this hardcore neo-Nazi organization,
Right.
quite a while ago, in 2021. It was like a formal setting. I didn't know him. I'm not friends, but asking him some questions, part of like a journalistic sort of thing. And but basically we're asking like who are you guys? Because C14 is this hardcore, like C14, 1488,
Right.
they kill like Roma people. I wrote a whole article about them, like,
Right. Right. I read that.
we love,
Yeah.
we love killing the West. They said the West gives us weapons because we love killing. That's what they
That I
said. It
remember
was in
that interview
2021.
before the war
Yeah,
started, and I don't know if I
yeah,
mentioned it. I think I did mention it in our first Ukraine episode of
yeah,
like, yeah, this guy says that like you wouldn't want us to be independent because like we'd be bad boys, and like the EU
yeah.
couldn't
I
even
mean, that's
handle
all
it. Like,
bullshit.
yeah, and he was just
Yeah,
talking a lot
it's
of
all
shit and said
bullshit.
like the
But
West gives us weapons because we love killing. And like it's so fun
yeah,
for us, like and blah blah blah.
yeah.
Yeah, kind of, that
I
was
mean, that part's true. Yeah,
real sicko.
yeah, Karas. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't talk with him, but another person. But anyway, but we're like, so who are you guys? Why are you guys in this movement? And we're like, oh, well, most of us are like IT professionals, coders, and we joined this because we want to find ourselves in life. We want to have something interesting in our lives to give us purpose and so on. And yeah, I mean, these guys, they're all just like, upper middle class, sort of office professionals, whatever. I remember I taught this guy in my class as like,
Hmm.
obviously right wing, some like Nazi sort of guy. And yeah, and he was also like some kind of office guy. And it's just common, and people and they love being really racist, like, oh, like worrying about migrants, even though there are like no migrants in Ukraine, like no one goes there 'cause it sucks. I mean, there are some Africans that are trying to get to the EU, but like very
Yeah.
small amount, but they like, upset, have all these culture war obsessions. But anyway, it's just an interesting example of how like the people in this, and because to have the free time to dedicate yourself to this bullshit political stuff, people don't have that. People in Ukraine, they're working like 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. It's like you talk to people working at some shop. And I remember I talked with this woman working at like a little like a flower shop or something. I was like, so how much do you work? And she's like, yeah, 6 days a week, 12, 13 hours. That's just like
Yeah.
ordinary people like struggling to survive. As it is one of my favorite statistics, which is like incredibly depressing. But it's like before Euromaidan, I always fucking forget this. I always bring up the statistic and then I forget the exact thing. Basically, it was like before Euromaidan, something like 70%, like 80% of Ukrainians earned more than $500 a month, something like that. And then by 2020 or 2019, it was 85% earned less than $300 a month.
Jesus.
So it's like, people are just incredibly impoverished. Everyone's trying to leave the country. 2021 was the biggest year of, emigration for like the 10-year record. 660,000 people left Ukraine just in 2021 for like
Before the
economic
war.
reasons. Before the war. Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. That's the only thing anyone ever talks about in Ukraine, leaving the country. Like in my experience, when I lived there, like my students and all that thing, all they ever talk about, like, how do we leave the country? This place sucks and so on and so on. So like to have the free time and the funds and so on to like engage in some kind of weird like fucking political lopping about like paganism and fucking all this other rubbish. It's really it's only an opportunity that a very small amount of people have, a very small number of people like yeah.
That's a really good point. You could almost extrapolate that like globally, maybe on like a less extreme degree, but it's like when you look at, who used Twitter throughout the
Yeah,
2010s, it had all
exactly.
this like cultural influence, but it was like 5 to 7% of like the, US population actually used it. But these are
Yeah.
the people that had like in most cases, like on average, like more of a luxury
Mm,
of time and energy to like get in
mm,
like debates all day about, or people with
yeah.
comfortable laptop jobs. They could just like be there. So there's like, the vast majority of the population is like working and not logged on all the time. And yeah, I can see that being extremely the case in Ukraine.
З нами віра, з нами воля, з нами сила, з нами правда, гнити в полі, тяжка доля, тут чекає окупанта, готували на всіх напад, тоді де з собою мапа, брати, і сіли на беху, розчавили, бля, кацапа. щоб на мою землю падав, бліде тіло упало, я б сюди лізти не радив, моїх братиків чимало, окладуть землю впало, налетіли ніби хмари, катяться Божої кари, за вами летять байрактари, байрактари, шмек, 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 всіх шмек, 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 джевеліни, всіх папа, па-па-па-па, ЗСУ всіх ра-та-та, та-та-та-та, БМП, шмек, 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 і розчавили ми кацапи. Розчавили, бля, кацапи, кацап, 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 розчавили, бля, кацапи. З нами віра, з нами воля, з нами сила, з нами правда, гнити в полі, тяжка доля, тут чекає окупанта, готували на всіх напад, тоді за собою мапа, братики сіли на беху, розчавили.